From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
President Biden finally lets Ukraine use long-range American missiles to hit military targets inside Russia. What took him so long, and what is going to be the impact on the war as Donald Trump prepares to take over as American commander-in-chief. Plus, doubts grow about a pair of Donald Trump security nominees. Could Pete Hegseth at Defense and Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence be defeated in the Senate? Those are our subjects for today on Potomac Watch, our daily opinion podcast to the Wall Street Journal. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the editorial pages, and I'm here with my distinguished colleagues, Joe Sternberg and Elliot Kaufman. I don't know if they're offended by that adjective or not, but let's talk first about the Biden decision on ATACMS missiles. Joe, a decision leaked over the weekend. It's a long-time request of Ukraine, but resisted by the White House for fear that it would lead to a Russian escalation in the war. President Biden's reportedly changed his mind based on the fact that Vladimir Putin is already escalating, as he has throughout the war, by inviting North Korean troops to fight on the front lines, particularly in the Kursk region of southern Russia, a chunk of which Ukraine took itself some weeks back. There's as many as 10,000 North Koreans maybe coming in to fight. One assumes that Putin is using them as cannon fodder, but that will help Putin avoid more casualties. What do you make of this ATACMS decision, Joe?
Well, ordinarily with something like this, you would say better late than never, except that, the starting point here has to be that the consequence of having waited for such a long time to allow Ukraine to take full advantage of a lot of the military equipment that Western countries were sending there is that, the damage that Ukraine has suffered, the amount of territory that Putin has been able to gain over the course of this war, is a serious problem. I mean, it's a terrible thing for Ukraine and Ukrainians. It's a serious security problem for our European allies, and so that means it's a serious problem for the U.S. And you pointed to the fact that all throughout this war, the Biden administration and also some of our European partners have been plagued by self-doubt about escalation, the fear that if we gave the Ukrainians the resources that they need to properly defend themselves, that would trigger some kind of escalation from Putin. And now all of a sudden we're discovering that because they're worried that Trump is going to try to end the war on unfavorable terms, that this sort of permission to the Ukrainians to use these weapon systems in this way might actually be a good thing in terms of ending the war on more favorable terms for Ukraine. And you have to wonder then, if that's true, why didn't they do it much sooner?
Yeah, it just points to the folly of Biden policy throughout this war, and we're now 1,000 days, by the way. I think Tuesday is the 1,000th day of this conflict, Elliot. Tragic war, failure of American deterrence, European deterrence against Russia in the first instance. And now I think Joe's right. Biden is kind of emptying the stores here on behalf of Ukraine, wants to give them every dollar of military aid approved by Congress before January 20th when he leaves, the ATACMS use decision. The missiles will help Ukraine hit some targets inside Russia, military targets, weapon stores, command and control, supply nodes, things like that. But, the question is, probably won't at this stage change the general contour of the war, may stop Ukraine from losing more territory. So, I guess the big question here is, how will this be received by Donald Trump?
Well, I think that Donald Trump and his allies are eager to make hay out of it, try to say that this is an overly aggressive Biden administration move, when I think the real story is they're only doing it now. They had to wait for a supposed Russian escalation. I thought invading Ukraine and trying to march on Kiev was the escalation there. But every step of the way, each form of support the U.S. has been providing, it has come with these restrictions. And even now, Biden is still dribbling it out. The allowance is to use the ATACMS long-range missiles in the Kursk region of Russia, but maybe not other regions of Russia. So, Will Russia have to import troops from Cuba before Ukraine gets that allowance? I mean, Russia feels no compunctions about attacking all over Ukraine, smashing its energy infrastructure before winter, all of that. But Ukraine is handcuffed, and it's been handcuffed by the Biden administration.
Joe, a reaction of Donald Trump Jr. in a tweet to the decision by Biden, quote, "The military-industrial complex seems to want to make sure they get World War III going before my father has a chance to create peace and save lives. Got to lock in those trillions of dollars. Life be damned. Imbeciles," end quote. I'm not quite sure the imbecile comment is apt there. Maybe he should have used something else when you put out a tweet like that. But I think we can stipulate that Don Jr. doesn't know much about foreign policy, but he does reflect a view in the Trump inner circle that wants to get out of Ukraine and leave Ukraine to the tender mercies of Vladimir Putin. Now, we don't know what the president-elect thinks about this. He's a skilled negotiator, we hope, has been, so he does not want to go into any negotiation from a position of weakness. So he may welcome the ATACMS decisions if it does, in fact, strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position. But I think the fact that this reception is being made in some parts of the Trump circle suggests just how mistaken Biden has been to delay Ukraine weapons and their use.
The surprising thing about that Don Jr. quote is the fact that these people just don't know how to take yes for an answer. So, I mean, I get the frustration with the fact that, this war has now been grinding on for nearly 1,000 days without any sort of obvious conclusion in sight. In fact, that has been our frustration for most of this period as well, as it became clear that Western allies were not giving Ukraine the equipment that the Ukrainians needed and the permission that they needed to use that equipment to help them actually conclude things. So I get that frustration, but the situation that we're in right now is that, there have been these communications where Trump Sr., the president-elect, warned Putin not to escalate, and then we have this big attack on the energy infrastructure where Putin clearly is not paying attention to the speaking part. So now all of a sudden, Trump has the opportunity to take advantage of the big stick that Joe Biden is wielding here with the ATACMS. And you can make a very plausible argument here that what the Biden administration is doing is going to be very helpful for Trump's efforts to bring this war to some kind of end, because the best way to do that is to put more pressure on Putin. So I would think that a little bit of gratitude would be in order, along with the frustration that the Biden administration didn't do this much sooner.
Joe, let me ask you about a phone call that Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, made to Putin, widely reported, asking him to end the war. It had been the first time he's contacted Putin in many, many months. And, of course, Germany now is going to face a new election after Scholz's coalition collapsed. Widespread speculation that the Germans really want to wind down this war. And that is going to weaken Ukraine's position.
I think it's going to be a real problem. I mean, there's a lot of domestic politics going on here because, as you pointed out, Olaf Scholz is going to have to run for re-election, and his party, the Social Democrats, are widely expected to lose. He can't campaign for re-election on the economy because the German economy is in pretty awful shape right now. So it's pretty clear that his campaign pitch is going to be that he's a peacemaker, or that he's able to fit this traditional view that the Germans have of themselves as a bridge between Russia and the rest of the West. I mean, it's really, really a problem that Scholz is now, for these domestic political reasons, engaging in this kind of freelance diplomacy, apparently without having consulted with any of the Western allies before he did that phone call. But I think that it's also representative of one of the problems that the Biden administration, and frankly other European allies other than Germany, have created throughout the situation, which is that the longer they allowed this war to drag on without giving Ukraine the means to defend itself properly, the more you create an opportunity for accidents to happen. And I think that this looming German election and the political pressures around Olaf Scholz are one of that kind of accident. and it's just going to become a real problem.
Well, this whole mess in Ukraine that Biden is bequeathing to Trump is going to be one of the things that Donald Trump has to deal with, and we're going to have to see how he does it. And that will echo through whatever he does, will echo through the 4 years and may have very long-term security consequences for Europe and the United States. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will talk about Donald Trump's nominees for defense and national intelligence when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Potomac Watch podcast here for the Wall Street Journal, and I'm here with Joe Sternberg and Elliot Kaufman. Elliot, let's turn to Donald Trump's appointees. Now, Matt Gaetz, RFK Jr., getting a lot of the attention. But Tulsi Gabbard is flying under the radar a bit. She's been appointed as Director of National Intelligence. That's the body inside the White House that coordinates the findings and data of the 18 U.S. intelligence services. It's kind of preposterous that we have 18 intel services, but there we are. We have this enormous monstrosity of a government. It coordinates all of those, comes up with the assessments of threats, whether they have high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence, gets them to the president, and does the daily brief for the president. But you've been looking at her record on foreign policy and what her views are. What are you finding?
Well, the interesting thing is that she's violently opposed to most of the policies of President Trump's first term, and perhaps the policies that made that first term foreign policy successful. And you can run through them.
Iran, for example.
Sure. So on Iran, I think Trump is justly proud of that policy, and it has a few planks. Leaving the Obama deal with Iran, imposing maximum pressure sanctions, assassinating Qasem Soleimani, who was Iran's sort of terror chief, architect, all of those sorts of things. And as he said often on the campaign trail, he had Iran on its knees. And that's true when you look at money, and it's true to some extent when you look at aggression. Certainly Iran wasn't starting new seven-front wars under Trump's watch.
Right.
Now, what was Tulsi Gabbard saying that whole time? Tulsi Gabbard opposed each and every one of those steps and said that each and every one of them was Trump's path to war with Iran, and called Trump a warmonger for them, and said that really he wanted war and he was taking steps to get it. Now, what I think she shares with Trump is an aversion to wars and intervention abroad. But where she differs is that, Trump likes to talk about peace through strength. She sees that as just another way of warmongering. And so taking out Soleimani, she was certain would lead to Iran launching a large war, the U.S. getting embroiled and everything. But as we've seen, it turned out to be something of the opposite. It was her preferred policies, Obama, Biden style appeasement, that led to war. It was only after President Biden was elected that Iran began accelerating its nuclear enrichment, let alone setting off this larger war. And so I think she got that wrong, and she was utterly opposed to that Trump policy.
Now, that's very, very interesting. And there are other things she opposed that Trump did in the first term, such as withdrawing from the intermediate missile nuclear deal that Trump withdrew from after it became clear Putin was violating it. She said that was increasing the likelihood of a nuclear war. Now, she is not the decision maker here with the DNI. She's a presenter of intelligence, but she will be at the cabinet table. And the question is, would she be a fair arbiter of intelligence so that the president could make the best choice possible of how to respond to security threats? Intelligence, by its very nature, particularly of an adversary, Joe, is uncertain. There are always things that you don't know. You think you know, you might know. So you try to make the best estimate of what you do know to present a president with the best set of policy choices possible. The risk always is that you get the estimation of the threat wrong. Now, it can be overestimating it, as we did with WMD in Iraq. And that's what some of the people who like Tulsi Gabbard point to. Aha, see, we're going to put a check on the deep state, which always wants war. That entirely misjudges, in my view, the history of the intelligence services that I've been following for years. In fact, they make more mistakes underestimating threats. I mean, the classic illustration of that, of course, is Pearl Harbor before 9/11, both of those ending in disaster, but also underestimating Iran's nuclear progress over the last 2 decades, catching the CIA by surprise when Israeli intelligence, for example, found out that Iran had made a lot more progress than we thought.
And I mean, also sort of underestimating or misestimating the true internal dynamics within the politics of American adversaries. I mean, how surprised, so many intelligence types were by something like the collapse of the Soviet Union or the constant struggle to understand what's going on within the leadership in communist China. I mean, Paul, you've really hit on the important point here, which is that so much of intelligence gathering is not a purely data point-driven exercise. There's a huge amount of intuition that goes into how you are going to interpret these enormous quantities of data that the agencies collect, much of which is inevitably going to be contradictory. And what are the bits that you're going to put more emphasis on? What is your hunch or what is your gut feeling about the dynamics involved in a given situation, whether it is the likelihood that the Iranian regime is going to continue pursuing nuclear weapons or the stability of the Chinese economy or any of the rest of it. And so I think that this kind of question that Elliot was pointing to about Tulsi Gabbard's judgment really matters quite a lot, because that job is all about judgment. So if you have someone who has demonstrated consistently bad intuition about all of these important issues, you do have to ask, and I think that there are some very good questions to ask about how effective she can really be in that role.
Why do you think Trump nominated Gabbard here, apart from rewarding her for his support? She's on the left wing of the Democratic Party. She's in the Sanders wing.
She might be in the Chomsky wing of the party.
That is Noam Chomsky.
I think it's because she's hostile to the intelligence agencies. And the intelligence agencies in Trump's first term, before it, after it, during it, did a lot to make themselves hostile to President Trump.
Yeah.
But that's not enough. There are other Republicans, John Ratcliffe at the CIA.
Nominated by Trump for CIA.
Exactly. Who came out right away when those 50 intelligence officials said that the Hunter Biden laptop was classic Russian disinformation. He said, not so. In the Trump first term.
He was DNI under Trump.
That's right.
Late Trump.
And so you can have people at the individual agencies who can corral those agencies. But at DNI, you want someone who isn't bringing strong policy biases, isn't letting that interfere with their interpretation of the evidence.